My name's Jack. I'd been on the road for hours, heading to a small town for a last-minute project. The agency had sent me on this solo trip, and I was just hoping to wrap it up quickly and head home. It was supposed to be a simple drive, but by 5 p.m., things had already started to feel off. The fog was creeping in, thick and suffocating, as I pushed forward. The headlights barely made a dent in the mist, and the trees on either side of the road twisted like ancient, gnarled hands reaching out to grab me. I had driven for miles without seeing another car. The radio was silent, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thrum of the tires on the road. Suddenly, without warning, a deer burst from the trees. It dashed across the road, and I swerved instinctively. The tires screeched in protest, and I slammed the brakes hard. The car skidded, barely missing the animal, but when it finally stopped, I heard a sickening crunch. My heart raced as I glanced out the window. The deer was gone, but I could feel the tension in the air. Then I realized, my front tire was completely flat. Frustration set in as I looked around, but the road was still empty. The isolation of the situation, along with the eerie fog, felt like the universe was playing a cruel trick on me. My hands fumbled as I grabbed the spare, realizing that the process would take longer than I'd hoped. Hours passed. The light was beginning to fade, and I still hadn't seen another car. Just as I was about to give up hope, I heard a distant rumble. Slowly, through the fog, an old truck appeared, moving at a crawl. The truck came to a stop in front of me, and the driver, a weathered old man with a thick beard and a worn cap, stepped out. He surveyed the situation with a quiet nod before approaching.
"You in a bind, son?"
he asked in a slow, gravelly voice. "Yeah. Tires busted. I don't know if I'll make it much farther," I said, feeling a bit of relief. He gave a knowing look, as if he'd seen this happen before.
"I'll give you a hand."
With his help, the tire was fixed in no time. He didn't say much, just worked with an almost mechanical precision. As he wiped his hands on a rag, he looked up at me.
"You're lucky I came along. You'll need to be careful now, night's coming fast, and you've still got a long way to go."
His voice carried a warning. I thanked him, grateful for the help, but unease settled in my stomach. The fog was growing thicker by the minute, and the sun had nearly disappeared beyond the horizon. Before he left, the old man gave me one last piece of advice, his voice low but urgent.
"Listen, son, don't stop, not for anything. You just keep driving. The road's bad out here, and night makes it worse. Keep going, no matter what you see. Just drive straight through."
His words hit me like a punch, and for the first time, I understood there was something more to this road than I realized. I nodded, trying to hide the creeping fear in my chest, and watched as the old man slowly drove off, disappearing into the fog. I got back in the car, started it up, and pressed on. The road stretched out ahead, dark and empty. But his warning echoed in my head, the urgency of it gnawing at me. I had to get home. I had no idea what lay ahead, but I couldn't afford to stop. The road felt like it was closing in, and the fog swallowed everything in its path. Hours passed, and with every mile, my exhaustion grew. The clock on the dashboard blinked midnight. My eyelids felt heavy, and my hands seemed to be drifting from the wheel. I was fighting to stay awake, but fatigue was winning. The constant hum of the engine, the road stretching endlessly in front of me, and the thick fog all made my mind dizzy. I couldn't go on much longer. And then, through the haze, I saw it. A flickering light in the distance. A small gas station with an attached motel, standing alone in the middle of nowhere. Relief washed over me. I hadn't realized how badly I needed a break until now. I pulled into the parking lot, the tires crunching on the gravel. The place looked ancient, dimly lit, with peeling paint on the walls and an old sign that barely hung on. The air was cold, and the mist crept closer. But I didn't care. I was too tired to be wary. I parked the car and trudged toward the motel office, hoping to get some rest. The door creaked open when I pushed it. The old man behind the counter looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly as if sizing me up. "Room for the night?" he asked, his voice gravelly and uninviting. "Yeah, just a place to sleep." "I've been driving too long," I replied, too exhausted to argue. The old man handed me a key and gave me a hard look. "You'll need to rest. But you're not staying here long. Got a helper inside, he'll take your things to your room." He glanced out the window at the dark road, then turned back to me. "You'd be better off not hanging around outside, especially now. Just get to your room, lock the door, and stay inside. Night can be dangerous out here." I thanked him, feeling my exhaustion pulling at me as I took the key. I walked to the hallway and found room 19. The door creaked open as I inserted the key, and I stepped into a small, dimly lit room. It was simple, a bed with worn sheets, a TV in the corner, a small bathroom with a shower and sink, and a couple of basic essentials scattered around. I turned on the shower, wanting to wash off the long drive. The water, once it started flowing, had an odd smell, like rust mixed with something else, something almost metallic. But I was too tired to care. I rinsed quickly, ignoring the unpleasant scent as best I could, and stepped out of the shower. As I dried myself off and dressed, I noticed something strange. The air in the room felt heavier, like the walls themselves were closing in. But I brushed it off as exhaustion. I was just about to sit on the bed when there was a knock at the door. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It was late. I wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitantly, I stood up and walked toward the door, wondering who it could be. I opened the door. Nothing. The hallway was empty. But then, my eyes fell to the ground just outside the door. My luggage. It was thrown haphazardly on the doorstep, like it had been carelessly dropped there, not brought in properly as the old man had promised. My frustration flared. I had been waiting for hours, and now this. I was too tired to go back to the counter to complain, so I grabbed the bags and dragged them into the room. I let out a long sigh and sat on the bed, rubbing my temples. Hoping to distract myself, I reached for the remote and turned on the TV. But nothing happened. Just a black screen. Frowning, I leaned forward, pressing the buttons on the TV itself, but still, it wouldn't turn on. I was about to check the power cord when a movement. Just in the corner of my eye. Outside the window. A shadow. Someone was watching me. I turned my head sharply, but whatever it was, whoever it was already gone. Just a lingering blur of something pale vanishing into the fog. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't alone. My breath hitched as I sat frozen on the bed, my eyes locked on the window. The fog outside seemed thicker now, pressing against the glass like a living thing. My hands felt clammy, and my heartbeat pounded in my ears. I grabbed my phone and quickly tried to call someone, anyone. But as soon as I looked at the screen, dread settled deep in my gut. No signal. I swallowed hard and moved around the room, holding the phone up in every direction, desperately hoping for a single bar. Nothing. Just an empty void of connection. Then I froze. It was coming from the room beside mine. Fast, frantic footsteps. Like someone pacing back and forth in a panic. I held my breath, listening intently. The movement was erratic, uneven. Whoever was in there wasn't just walking, they were distressed. A sudden stop. Silence. I took a cautious step toward the wall, pressing my ear against it. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I strained to hear anything else. Then. A whisper. Faint. Muffled. Like someone speaking through gritted teeth. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the fear in them. And just as I leaned in closer. Something slammed against the other side of the wall. I stumbled back, heart in my throat, my hands shaking. What the hell was going on in that room? I wanted to believe it was just another guest. Maybe someone having a nightmare, or someone just restless from the road. But deep down, I knew better. Something wasn't right. And I had a horrible feeling I was about to find out what. The room felt like it was closing in on me. My pulse was hammering in my ears as the echo of the frantic footsteps from next door still rang in my mind. I couldn't stay here, my legs felt frozen, but my body moved anyway, the door handle cold under my trembling fingers. I hesitated for a moment, dread pooling in my stomach. What if something was waiting outside? But the silence, it was deafening. The footsteps had stopped. The air felt thick, oppressive. I pushed the door open, just enough to peer out into the hallway. Empty. No sound, no movement. The dim lights flickered above, casting long, stretching shadows that seemed to twist and curl. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I stepped cautiously into the hallway, scanning every inch of the space. It was too quiet, too still. But just as I began to turn back, there he was. The old man. He stood at the end of the hallway, his figure emerging from the shadows like some apparition. His eyes locked onto mine with an unsettling intensity. It was as if he had appeared from nowhere, there hadn't been a sound, no footsteps to warn me. He just was there. I froze, heart pounding, throat tight. The air felt heavier now, as though the walls themselves were closing in on me. His expression didn't shift. He didn't say anything at first. He simply stared at me with that piercing gaze. And then, in a voice low and steady, almost a whisper, he said, "You shouldn't be out here." My breath hitched. My instincts screamed for me to retreat, but my legs refused to move. The old man's eyes flicked toward the door beside mine, and a shiver crawled up my spine. He didn't need to say anything more. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. I hadn't just been hearing things. Something was wrong. I blinked, trying to shake the fog in my brain. The old man's eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, I thought I saw something flicker in them. But then, without a word, he turned and began to walk away from me. His steps were slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. I opened my mouth, wanting to ask him what was going on, but the words got stuck in my throat. I tried again, but he didn't respond, didn't even glance back. I stood there for a moment, feeling a cold knot of dread in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. But I couldn't stand here forever. I had to get out. I had to leave. I turned and made my way to the bathroom, hoping the cold water would clear my head. The faucet screeched as I turned it on, and I splashed my face, feeling the cold sting against my skin. But it didn't help. I still felt like I was losing my grip on reality. As I wiped my face, I heard it. The door slammed shut. So hard, it felt like the whole building shook. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. No one else was around. There was no way the wind could have done that. Then, the door slammed again. Harder. Someone was trying to get in. Panic rushed through me. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I ran, my legs heavy with fear, and yanked open the closet door. I slammed it shut behind me, stumbling into the darkness. I pressed my back against the cold, stiff wood, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The silence was suffocating, but it didn't last long. The door rattled again, and I could hear something, or someone, pounding on the other side. My chest tightened, my pulse racing. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook violently, and I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. I prayed to whatever gods were out there that whatever was out there wouldn't find me. I barely had time to process what was happening when I heard it crack. The door handle snapped, the sound of metal breaking sending a shock through my entire body. My breath hitched in my throat. Someone was in the room. I wasn't alone. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. Heavy, like they were purposefully trying to make noise. I could hear the creak of the floorboards, the slight shuffle of someone's boots dragging against the carpet. My heart pounded in my chest, and every breath I took felt like a betrayal, like the air itself would give me away. Then I heard it, his breathing. It was loud. Labored. Like he was just as scared as I was, or maybe, like he was savoring the hunt. I pressed myself further into the corner of the closet, praying that he wouldn't hear my erratic heartbeat. He moved around the room, methodical, each footstep like a death knell. I could hear him searching, opening drawers, rummaging through things, knocking stuff over. His breath quickened with each passing second, getting closer and closer to the closet. I felt my pulse spike. I couldn't hold it anymore. I had to do something. I held my breath, waiting, willing myself to stay still. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps grew fainter. The heavy breathing stopped. Silence returned to the room, but it was the kind of silence that made my skin crawl. The stranger was gone. I waited for a few more minutes, my heart still racing. When I finally dared to move, I slowly peeked out from the closet. The room was a mess, drawers pulled open, things scattered across the floor, but no sign of the man. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my bags, throwing everything into them in a frenzy. My hands were shaking as I rushed to gather what I could. I couldn't stay here. Not for another second. Whatever had just happened wasn't over. I had to leave. I ran out of the room and headed straight for my car. The engine roared to life, and I didn't look back. I just drove, driving faster than I ever had, through the fog, through the night, until the motel was nothing but a fading memory in the rearview mirror. It was 2 a.m. when I finally left the motel, my hands still trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The fog seemed to follow me, pressing in on all sides, making it feel like I was driving through a never-ending tunnel. I couldn't shake the image of that stranger searching the room, his heavy breathing lingering in my ears. I pressed the pedal to the metal, the engine growling as I sped down the road. I didn't care about the speed. I just needed to get as far away as possible. The car hurtled down the empty road, the tires screeching against the asphalt as I tried to push my way through the night. My thoughts raced faster than the car could go. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be following me, but there was nothing. Nothing but the eerie silence of the fog. It didn't take long for the flashing lights to appear in my mirror. My heart sank. I didn't even slow down. I couldn't. The fear that gripped me was too strong. But the police car stayed on my tail, the siren wailing louder with every passing second, until I had no choice but to pull over. The officer approached, his flashlight blinding me for a second. I tried to steady my hands, but they were shaking too much to hide it. He asked for my license and registration, his voice stern, but I could barely focus on his words. My mind was still stuck back at that motel, still hearing the creak of the floorboards, still feeling the chill of the stranger's breath on the back of my neck. I handed him my documents, my voice barely a whisper as I tried to explain. I was at the motel back there. Something happened. Someone was in my room, and they were searching for me. I don't know what's going on, but it was like something out of a nightmare. The door was slammed, and someone tried to break in. I had to get out. I couldn't stay there. The officer's face shifted from annoyance to confusion as he listened. He asked me more questions, but the words wouldn't come out right. I could barely breathe, my heart still racing in my chest. "Please, you have to believe me," I pleaded. I didn't mean to speed, I just had to leave. It's not safe there. It wasn't just me in that room. I don't know what I saw, but something's wrong. The officer stared at me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. He probably thought I was just some paranoid guy, driving too fast in a panic. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw doubt, just enough doubt to make me feel like I wasn't the only one who thought something was terribly wrong. He didn't say much after that, just told me to get out of the car and sit in the back of his cruiser while he called it in. I didn't argue. I needed help, and I wasn't going to get it by speeding away. The officer left to speak with someone over the radio, and I sat there, staring into the darkness, wondering if I had just narrowly escaped something far worse than a speeding ticket. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the nightmare wasn't over, that I wasn't going to be let go easily. It wasn't long before the officer returned, but something in his eyes had changed. He didn't look at me with the same indifference. There was something else there now, something that made my stomach drop. "You're not Jack," the officer said, his voice low and firm. I blinked, my heart skipping a beat. "What are you talking about?" I stammered. "I am Jack. I just—" "You're not Jack," he repeated, stepping closer to the car. "Jack Thompson, the man who stayed at the motel. He's dead." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean he's dead?" I was shaking now, panic clawing at my chest. "I'm Jack. I'm right here." But the officer's expression didn't falter. "We found Jack in room 19 of the motel. Dead. We know who he is. You're not him." My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel the blood draining from my face. "That's not possible. I'm Jack. I was just in that room. You were never in that room, not as Jack," he said, his voice growing colder. "You're the one who killed him. We have your fingerprints all over the room, on the door, the furniture, and Jack's blood. You're the man we've been looking for." I froze, my heart pounding painfully in my chest. No, this couldn't be happening. The events of the past few hours flashed through my mind, too many things didn't add up, but they made sense now. The fear I had felt, the stranger in my room, the way everything had gone wrong. I was never Jack. I was the killer. The man who had taken Jack's life and assumed his identity to escape. My mind spun in chaos. I didn't know who I was anymore. "You're under arrest for the murder of Jack Thompson," the officer said, handcuffing me as he read me my rights. The words barely registered in my foggy brain. "You'll be booked and charged. There's no escaping it." I wanted to scream, to plead, to say I was innocent, but the words wouldn't come. I had already realized something: Jack was never here to begin with. I wasn't him. I was just someone who had stolen his life, his identity, and now I was going to pay for what I had done. And as they drove me away, the haunting truth settled in: the real Jack was gone, and I had become someone else.
Breaking news. Unidentified killer behind gruesome murder of local man Jack Thompson. In a shocking turn of events, authorities have revealed new details about the brutal murder of Jack Thompson, a well-known freelance consultant, who was found dead earlier this week at a remote motel located on the outskirts of town. The investigation, which initially seemed to be a case of unfortunate circumstances, has taken a dark and unexpected twist.
I'm Daniel, and this is a story I never thought I'd tell. It wasn't supposed to be anything unusual, a late-night drive home after a long day. But what happened that night still haunts me, lingering like a shadow I can't escape. It started with a stranger on the side of the road, a simple decision to help. But sometimes, the kindest choices lead to the darkest places. What I experienced that night wasn't just strange, it was terrifying. This isn't just a story. It's a warning. Stay with me, and I'll take you back to that night, where everything began. I went to my friend's house that evening to attend his mother's funeral. It had been a long, emotional day, and after spending about 5 hours at his house, I finally decided to head home. It was already pretty late when I left, around 11 p.m. The night air was chilly, and there weren't many cars on the road. I remember just driving, lost in my thoughts, trying to shake off the heaviness of the day. But then, something caught my attention. I saw someone standing by the side of the road, and she waved towards my car. I wasn't sure what was going on, so I drove a little further. But something in me felt like I couldn't just ignore her. I quickly reversed the car and stopped, my heart racing a bit. As I looked, I saw it was a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s. She looked a little shaken, standing there in the dim streetlight. She told me she wasn't from around here and, with a desperate tone, asked if I could help her get home. It was strange, something felt off, but she seemed so sincere. It was late, and I knew I couldn't just leave someone stranded like that, especially not a woman. I paused for a second, my mind racing with thoughts. Could I trust her? Was this a setup? But in the end, I decided to help. It felt like the right thing to do at the time. So, I agreed. Yeah, I can help, I said. And that's how it all started. After that, she got into my vehicle. As we began our journey, I casually started asking her about herself, hoping to make the ride a bit more engaging. However, I found it difficult to hear her clearly because the radio sound was too loud. I quickly turned the volume down and resumed the conversation. Despite my efforts, her answers remained brief and to the point, almost distant. She responded to my questions, but there was something about her tone that made me feel a bit uneasy. Her clipped replies, combined with her somewhat reserved manner, left me feeling nervous and unsure of how to continue the conversation. Why does she seem so distant? I'm trying to be friendly, but it's like I'm talking to a wall. It doesn't feel right. Just as I was about to ask another question, the car suddenly jolted, throwing us both forward. The road had been smooth moments ago, but now it felt bumpy and uneven. I slammed the brakes, my heart racing. What the hell? Was that a pothole? No, it felt more like something was pulling us off course. What's happening? She didn't react, though. She remained eerily still, her eyes fixed ahead, as if nothing had happened. I looked out the window to see what had caused the disturbance. Nothing seemed out of place, just an ordinary stretch of road lined with trees. Are you okay? I asked, my voice shaky. She didn't respond. I reached over to tap her on the shoulder, but as my fingers brushed her sleeve, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt wrong. Like a chill ran through me, though the air in the car was warm. What's going on with her? She hasn't flinched once, not even when the car jerked. What's happening? After driving a short distance, I noticed a woman waving at my car again. My heart skipped a beat as I slowed down and stopped near her. I lowered the mirror and looked at her face, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. To my shock, it was the same woman I had encountered before. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and my heart started pounding in my chest. Every muscle in my body tensed, as if a sudden wave of dread had washed over me. No, no way. This can't be happening again. It's like I'm stuck in a loop. Why is she here? Why am I here? I quickly glanced behind me, my breath catching in my throat. The woman who had been speaking to me earlier was now standing right next to my car, mere inches away. But what made my blood run cold was the fact that she was not sitting inside my car anymore. The air felt heavy, and the night seemed unnaturally still. This is it. This is the moment when everything goes wrong. A wave of panic surged through me, my instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong. Without thinking, I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, the car jerking forward as if it, too, wanted to escape. My mind raced, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, desperately trying to comprehend what had just happened. But no matter how fast I drove, the eerie sensation that I was being watched, followed, never left me. The fear gnawed at me, a relentless, growing presence in the back of my mind, as I sped into the unknown, not daring to look back again. As I sped down the road, the weight of fear pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The headlights flickered again, casting strange shadows on the road ahead. My hands were clammy, and my heart pounded in my chest. I could still feel her presence, lingering, like a dark cloud hanging over me. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see her face, staring back at me from the back seat. But each time, it was empty. Then, the car jerked. A cold wind rushed through the car, even though the windows were all shut. I looked around, but everything felt off. The road stretched on too long, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. It was as if the world around me was warping. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, the static buzzing loudly. I froze. Through the noise, I heard it, her voice. "Why are you running?" My breath caught in my throat. How was this happening? I slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a halt. The engine sputtered and died, leaving only silence. I looked out into the darkness, hoping for something familiar, but everything felt like it was swallowing me whole. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, praying I was imagining things. But there she was, sitting in the back seat, just like before. Her cold eyes were fixed on me, and her lips barely moved as she whispered, "You never left." I whipped around in panic, but the back seat was empty. I couldn't make sense of it. My mind was spinning. When I turned back to the road, a wave of terror hit me. The familiar trees and road signs were gone. In their place were endless, twisted roads, all surrounded by thick, swirling fog. Then, through the fog, I saw her. A small, dimly lit figure standing just ahead. I could barely make her out, but I knew it was her. She was waiting for me. I tried to start the car, but it wouldn't budge. The engine refused to cooperate, frozen in place. The panic inside me grew, my hands trembling on the wheel. Her voice came again, but this time, it wasn't distant. It was right behind me. "Welcome to your final destination." I turned around, but the back seat was empty again. There was no one there. The fog thickened, closing in around the car. The air grew heavy, suffocating, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The last thing I heard was her whisper. "You should have never stopped." And then, everything went black. Saying that, she immediately started squeezing my neck, and I woke up with a scream, gasping for air. My body was drenched in sweat. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Please save me," I shouted, clutching my chest, my mind still spinning from the nightmare.